This is how to harden Active Directory to prevent cyber attacks. So real quick, I put an Easter egg. I thought, I'm doing all these slides and all this work. I thought it'd be kind of interesting or funny to kind of put some an Easter egg in this. Okay, so there's a picture of Waldo somewhere in the slides. So I've got a picture of Waldo somewhere in the slides. I've hidden it somewhere. I'm not going to tell you where it is. But the first couple people to take a screenshot of the slide and send it to me on Twitter or LinkedIn or like tag me in on social, I'll send you a sticker, and that's that NSA sticker that I created. It's on my Etsy store right now. So a little Easter egg, little fun little thing. So how do you harden Active Directory, right? I started thinking about this. I'm like, well, how do you build a house, right? And I think that's a simple analogy that we can all relate to is how do you build a house, right? You start from the roof. Do you start with the roof? Do you start with the fence? Do you put the alarm system in? Do you put the windows in first? How you build a house is kind of how I like to think about building Active Directory. Where do you put the windows when there's no frame built, right? So you start with the foundation. Obviously, a good foundation sets you up for success, right? Then you put the walls in, you put windows in, you got the electrical, the plumbing, all that stuff. And once the house is the frame is built, you put the roof on. And I have on the screen some kind of analogies here for some of those different things, right? So like the windows and the doors are your access control. Your foundation is your AD infrastructure, your domain controllers and certificate services. The grass and the lawn and the yard, that's like the maintenance and the upkeep. The fences and things like that and alarm systems, those are your firewalls, your IDS, your EDR, things like that. So my point is you kind of build from the ground up. You start small and you start slow and you kind of build over time. And eventually, if you build it well, it's much harder to blow the roof off. And there was a funny video I saw on TikTok just recently that illustrates this. Has anyone seen like those tornado chasers, excuse me, on TikTok? I forget what the name of the people who do it. They've got like this name for their truck, and they've got like this drone. Well, anyways, they're driving through and they're in Texas just recently. And there's this video, the Dominator. They have super cool videos about chasing tornadoes. So they're driving through this town in Texas. They're like going down this road and they're in the middle of a tornado and there's a house and it's like whipping around. And the house was like stable. It was just stuck there. Some shingles were flying off. There was some stuff flying, but the house was like relatively stable for like hundreds of miles an hour winds or whatever crazy winds they are with those nasty tornadoes. And that's kind of what made me think about like this analogy is like, if you build it right and you do it well, you can hopefully prevent some damage down the road. Yeah, Reed Timmer. Thank you. Yeah. Super cool videos. If you're like a weather nerd or anything, they've got like super cool, nerdy stuff. Okay, so before we get too far, who am I? My name is Spencer Alessi. For all you joining just now, and for those of you who don't know me or haven't seen me, I haven't seen the Twisters. Yeah. My name is Spencer Alessi. I'm a pen tester at Secure IT 360. I primarily focus on internal pen testing, assume breach, Windows, Active Directory, internal networks, and that kind of thing. I come from help desk, so my background is in help desk and systems administration. I spent, close to 10 years administering senior. Thanks. I always forget that senior pen tester here at Security IT 360. Thanks, Jake. So I used to administer Active Directory all the time. I went through all these same struggles that I'm going to kind of talk to you guys about today. But I administered it. I went through those pain points. I've gone through a lot of those struggles, and I have a lot of stories that we can probably relate to, and we have similarities there with backgrounds. So I used to be a sysadmin. I'm a recovering sysadmin, as I sometimes will say. But now I am a guest enterprise admin, as you see in that shirt design there. So essentially my goal now, and what I do is I help sysadmins secure their internal networks in Active Directory. I try to attack or approach security from like a hacker perspective and kind of using curiosity, ingenuity, resourcefulness, and kind of trying to think about things in a different way. But ultimately, I'm a defender. As Jake will tell you, I'm red with blue stripes, or maybe blue with red stripes, if you will. But my goal really is to help organizations be a little bit more secure today than they were yesterday. So in all the content that I do, in the podcast and this webinar, I hope that you get a little piece of knowledge, some nugget of information you can kind of take back and help your organizations be a little bit more secure. And I hope this presentation delivers on that value. I've got some certifications and whatnot. Like I said, we've got a podcast, The Cyber Threat Perspective, where we talk about different security topics every week. And I also make some free tools that you'll see in this webinar and elsewhere. So I do a little bit of that on the side. Obviously, content, all of you who are here have probably seen me posting content stuff on social media, and then of course swag on my Etsy store, where I make t-shirts and stickers and fun stuff that comes to my mind. So what's a typical attack look like, right? So kind of setting the stage for hardening Active Directory. Let's look at kind of a high level typical attack, right? This is a little bit overgeneralized, right? But it kind of gets the sense of what we're looking at and kind of sets the stage. So initial access, right? Threat actor gets initial access. They get admin credentials from that host, right? Maybe the user is a local admin, or they were able to elevate their privileges in some way. So they get admin credentials, right? Maybe it's the local admin account, and then they use that to spread laterally, right? They spread to the file server, backup servers, etc. They find sensitive data, or maybe they find company data that they want to ransomware, or anything in between. They exfil that data, and then they ransomware and extort, right? Maybe they double dip and kind of go after it two ways. So this is from Christmas Eve last year, and this report is on the defer report for anyone wanting to check it out. But essentially, kind of what a high-level attack typically looks like, right? Admin credentials, they move laterally, find data, exfil it, ransomware, right? So they start with credentials. So the success of that threat actor's operation relies on their ability to obtain credentials, right? Not always, right? Sometimes they don't need admin rights to ransomware an environment or to get access to sensitive data. That happens. But most of the time they need credentials, right? They need admin credentials to move laterally, to get to access to servers, to access domain controllers, so that they can DC sync or dump credentials from memory, etc. So they need credentials. And they need credentials that provide them access to systems and resources that contain sensitive information, critical information, that they're going to use to extort the organization or sell on the dark web, that kind of thing. So they need access, right? They need access to systems with that information. And then ultimately, they want to control the environment through using their C2 channels, through disabling security products, or abusing group policies, abusing authentication protocols like LM&R, and using certificate services. So they essentially want to seek control over the network so that they can deploy the ransomware, right? And then, like I said, double dip, extort, and all those things. So they need credentials, they need access, and they need control. And that's kind of the framework that I'm kind of be working from with this webinar. And kind of what I'm going to be referring back to often is credentials, access, and control, and kind of looking at that from a hardening standpoint. So naturally, I say the heck with that, right? Let's not give the threat actors the opportunities to get credentials. Let's not make it too easy for them. Let's restrict what they have access to, right? Let's not let them move laterally. Let's restrict, what systems and resources they can access. Let's eliminate the potential for attacker control, right? Let's get rid of some of that low-hanging fruit that allows them to control authentication or control access to systems. And ultimately, let's not make it too easy for them, So the game plan. So this is kind of, like I said, the game plan in the framework for kind of setting the stage for the controls and the hardening aspects of this webinar. So step number one is identify misconfigurations. Time and time again, we go into pen tests or recurring pen tests and we see the same findings, the same issues. even back to back from clients year after year. And the goal here for this step number one is to identify the low-hanging fruit, get rid of it. And like I said, don't make it easy on them, right? Make them have to work hard at it, make them have to use novel approaches or new techniques or burn kind of more sophisticated tools and techniques in order to kind of, exploit your organization or compromise things. So step number one is identify misconfigurations. Step number two is implement what I call AD Security 101. So this is kind of the base level hardening aspects, or the base level hygiene and hardening that you need to do to secure Active Directory. And then step number three is the 201 things. These are things that are bigger projects. They're a little bit harder, which I'll show here in a minute. They're a little bit harder to do. They take more coordination, more configuration, more structure, more documentation, but certainly very worthwhile efforts. And those are the three things that I'm going to get into today. And each one of those things, step 4, profit. Thanks, Jonathan. And Pingcastle is great. So as I'll show, each one of these phases has very specific things I'm going to mention in this webinar. And this is not meant to be all-encompassing. There are obviously things outside of this, but I think these are some of the bare minimum things that we need to do to really harden our environments, make pen testers cry, make threat actors cry, and ultimately make them, choose another organization to target and kind of move on, give up. And then you repeat, right? So you repeat the cycle, because as we know, we get new IT staff, we have turnover, we have new technologies we implement, we have new software that gets installed. And so this is a process that we need to be kind of doing on a recurring basis. Some of these security things with like the 201 area, once you set it up, it's relatively straightforward. You just kind of have to maintain it and make sure it's continues to be implemented correctly. But with misconfigurations and some of this introductory stuff, this is going to happen time and time again. So it's important to have a process to kind of review this every so often. So I apologize ahead of time. This webinar might give you some work to do. I hope it helps you think about things in a different way, or helps provide you with some insights that you can take away. But you might walk away from this webinar with some homework. The very first thing is documentation. Documentation is crucially important. And again, like I said, this is going to focus on very specific things. This webinar is not all encompassing of every single hardening measure that you can implement in Active Directory. I've tried to include the ones that I think are most impactful and will be most applicable to most everybody that is attending this webinar right now. And like I said, remember, credentials, access, control. Threat actors need credentials, they need access, and they want to control the environment. So that's what we're going to focus on from a hardening security standpoint. So first misconfiguration is credentials. Plain text credentials on file shares. KeyPass databases that have weak passwords that are easily crackable. World readable shares with passwords on them. Web.config files and scripts, and VNC configs and mremote config files and unattend files. There's a whole bunch of these unsecured credential files that you can go out and look for. I have tools that can find some of those things. There are other tools that you can use, which I'll show in a minute. I'll show an easy mode and hard mode aspect of it. But unsecured credentials are the #1 finding on internal pen test. It's something is ubiquitous across every organization, large and small, no matter the vertical. This is a big problem for organizations. And so many times, all it would take is just going out and looking, running a script, or writing a PowerShell script to automate this every so often to crawl the shares, to look for these things. And this would be completely eradicated if that were the case. Hey, Italy, what's up? Yeah, APIs are just longer passwords. Exactly. API keys is another one. That's a really good one. What's up from Italy? Hey, how's it going? Thanks for joining. I appreciate it. What time is it in Italy? That's interesting. Is that Italy like? Okay, sorry, distracted. Oh, cool. 1806. Nice, cool. Well, happy evening to Italy, folks. So password use. If you're not using LAPS or something similar, you're probably reusing passwords. This is also a common issue with new user setup passwords, right? 2 a.m. in Australia. Wow. Well, thanks for being here at 2 a.m. in Australia. So new user setup passwords. I'm on an engagement just this week where, I'm going through shares and document management systems and stuff, and there's a new user setup password that's a default password. And that's probably very common for many organizations. The problem is if you discover that password, if it's a weak password, if you find that anywhere and there's still users using that password, you can kind of use that to pivot and move in the environment. And of course, shared service accounts, this is very common. And then lastly, Kerberostable admin accounts. Admin accounts that have no reason having an SPN, right? Maybe it was used to set up a service or configure something and then it wasn't actually removed afterwards. We crack admin accounts all the time from Kerberosting. We did it last week on an engagement that Darius had. I'm working on an engagement this week where I'm literally cracking passwords right now, hopefully, cross my fingers, that I crack them, but this is a very common issue and very, very avoidable. So unsecured credentials, easy mode. My recommendation is when you first start doing this is just go out to your file shares, go out to your document repositories, whether it's Dropbox or OneDrive or SharePoint, file shares, and just search for some common phrases like passw or password or login or web.config or unattend, and just go out and search for them. And that's step number one. Once you get beyond that and get a little bit more advanced and want to automate it, you can write a PowerShell script. There are additional tools that you can automate, but this is step one. If you haven't done it at all, or if you just kind of want to see what's out there, do this first. Then you can use tools like Snaffler. Snaffler is super cool. It's a great tool. I would recommend reading the README because it's more like hard mode, as I call it. If you just run it in its default configuration, it won't actually do anything, but it will look like it is. So read the documentation, but this is a great tool that you can use to kind of automate some of the things and do searching with like regular expressions and do some more advanced searching. Yeah, searching GPOs as well, for sure. Interestingly enough, another tool that I'm going to mention does search for those things, a couple of them. So Kerberostable admin accounts. So Kerberosting, for those that aren't familiar, it's when you request a service ticket and for a specific service account, and that service ticket is encrypted with the password hash of that service account. And what you can do is you can take that hash offline. You can try and brute force it. You can try and crack it and potentially reveal the plaintext password. And so if you have an admin account that has an SPN on it, you can Kerberost it and potentially get the password for that. So that's pretty dangerous. So that's something we want to prune. Now moving on to access. Remember, credentials, access, and control. So access. This is also something that's super common is lack of separation of privileged accounts. So local admins being the same on all the machines. Overly permissive ACLs. I talked about this a little bit already, but this is file shares, OneDrive, Box, your document repositories that are just kind of wide open to everyone when they don't necessarily need to. So step number one in this framework is, pruning those permissions, pruning those shares and those ACLs, and thinking about it from least privilege. What are the least amount of groups or the least groups that need it, only allowing groups and users that need access to that to do their job. And then delegations. So this is like granting help desk the ability to reset passwords, but you accidentally give them permission to reset every password, right? Instead of specifying those permissions on a specific OU, you specify at a domain level, and now help desk can reset, like the domain admin password, which is pretty dangerous. So that's what we're going to identify in this phase as well. And then lastly, control. So this is where help desk is a member of IT services group, which is a member of account operators, for example, or where all users can modify group policies or modify files that are deployed by group policy. This is where logon scripts are misconfigured such that you're mounting shares that don't exist, or you're deploying files in those login scripts that are modifiable by users. So this is the control area. So credentials, access control. If they're able to control group policies or logon scripts or security group membership or authentication, now we can kind of exploit that control over the network as an attacker. And again, these are authentications like Spooler and WebDAV and Element-R. These are kind of authentication protocols or protocols that you can use to exploit control over the network. And so when I was thinking about this presentation, I'm like, well, you know, Superman, Metropolis has Superman, right? Gotham has Batman. Star City has the Flash. And I'm like, well, what does sysadmins have? Well, sysadmins have the Fabulous Four. So the Fabulous Four to me are Script Sentry, AD Delegator, Locksmith, and Pingcastle. These are like the 4 free tools that you need to run in your environment on a regular basis all the time. Run them, fix the issues that you find from them, and your environment will be much, much more secure. So a little, yeah, Locksmith. What's up, Rob? So this is the Fabulous Four, right? So just a quick sidebar. This webinar isn't, you know, solely dedicated to these tools, but this is step 1, right? Finding the misconfigurations and kind of identifying the low-hanging fruit, fixing those things. That's step number 1. Because honestly, a lot of times when we go in and we do a pen test, I use these tools and I find these things and I use them to get administrative rights. I use them to pivot to servers where there's backups, where there's sensitive data. I literally use the results from these tools to kind of exploit and, you know, attack organizations all the time. So why not use them for defense, right? And that's what, you know, all these tools, by the way, are not offensive security tools. None of these tools do exploitation. None of them are a post-exploitation tool. These are tools for defenders, right? So that's a very important thing that I like making a distinction of. So Script Sentry, it's a tool I created to find misconfigured and dangerous logon scripts. So logon scripts that have credentials in them, logon scripts that have unsafe permissions, like you can actually modify the logon script. And there's a whole bunch of issues. I did a lot of research into this, and you can go out to that GitHub repo where there's a lot more information on this. But essentially, dangerous, misconfigured logon scripts we see all the time. And Script Sentry can help you identify that. So run Script Sentry in your environment, fix the issues that you find. AD Delegator is kind of a wrapper around another pretty cool tool called AD Deleg. AD Deleg is just kind of a graphical user interface for delegations. I don't know of many other tools that show you kind of delegations in this way. And it is set up to kind of resemble AD users and computers, or ADUC, for those. So what you can do and what I recommend is you run AD Deleg and you use AD Delegator. It's going to go through all of your delegations that it can find, and it's going to look for where a high privileged user, where a low privileged trustee has access over a high privileged resource, or vice versa. So let me explain. High privileged resource would be things like tier 0 groups and users. So domain admins, domain controllers, jump boxes, right, Jake, or pause, IT admin workstations, critical servers. So those are high privileged resources. Low privileged trustees are things like the everyone group or authenticated users, non-administrators group, you know, domain users, end user computers. So you want to look for where low privileged trustees, you know, like everyone, like it shows in the screenshot, has, you know, has access or unsafe permissions, unsafe delegations over high privileged resources. So you want to look for those things. And insecure permissions or insecure delegations would be like, you know, like it shows in the screenshot, write all properties, or generic all, or generic write. And there's a lot of these unsafe properties that this script looks for. So AD Delegator runs AD Deleg, creates a report, checks for these misconfigurations, and then calls those out and says, hey, you have misconfigured permissions here, you should go look at them. So it's another great free tool. I've found a number of issues on engagements using this tool, and it's really great for finding those things. So again, it helps you find where low privilege trustees has access to high privilege resources. Yeah, Microsoft should think about adhering to their tier model. I'll get to that. Yeah. Yeah. Thank you for posting that link. There's somebody posted, Murat posted a link to tier 0 in the modern way, and I'll get to that. Yes, it will show some deny ACLs. Yep. So adeleg in its default view, it will show deny. If you go to like view, there's different options that you can configure there, and you can show different things. You can show the built-in delegations and things like that. So it's a really cool tool. It hasn't been updated in a few years. So if anybody knows Rust, I think this is written in Rust. So if anybody knows Rust and wants to work on new features or updates to this, this hasn't been updated in a couple of years, but still works really good. Locksmith, probably one of the best open source security tools right now. Even above all of the ones that I've written and shown you, this one is really, really awesome for a couple of reasons. One, it finds misconfigured certificate issues and certificate templates specifically. It finds all the kind of the modern certificate template mistakes that you'll see. And the other reason that it's really cool is it gives you these snippets to actually go out and fix those templates. So if it's a permission issue or something else, there's a little snippet that you can copy and run yourself to fix that issue. And this is kind of surged in popularity. This was created by Jake Hildreth, who works at Trimark, who might be in chat right now. I selfishly plug for myself. I help Jake contribute to this. I've contributed just a very small amount of code to this, but really such an awesome tool to find misconfigured certificate issues, to find these templates. I run this on every pen test. You'll see the screenshots in all my reports. And it's just a really great tool, and it shows the information very nicely in a nice, easily digestible way. And again, gives you like a remediation snippet to go out and fix it. And again, it's free. I can't believe Jake doesn't charge for it, but maybe someday he'll have a commercial version or something, so he can get some rewards from it. But super great tool. Ping Castle. So this rounds out kind of like my misconfiguration, fabulous 4, and that's Ping Castle. Ping Castle has 177, even more now because they've introduced a couple more rules recently. There's 177 rules in Ping Castle, right? So 177 different misconfigurations, hygiene items that you can look for. A lot of these, I would say maybe, I never thought about it, but maybe 20 to 30% of these are things that would allow a threat actor to immediately become domain admin or immediately kind of get credentials or obtain control over the network, maybe more than that. So definitely a great tool. It gives you a way to show improvement with like these indicators and these scores. So you can show the ROI of kind of going through this process and fixing it. So really cool tool. This is by Vincent Tu. I don't know if I'm saying the last name right, but he's a contributor to Mimikatz. Super cool, great tool, and also free to run for yourself in your own environment. If you're an auditor or like consultant or something, you need a license to use it. But like as yourself, as just a regular person in IT guy in an organization, you can go download this and use it. So the last stage of this misconfiguration section is a risk register or documentation in general. So you're going to go through this process. You're going to find all these things. You need some way to kind of document them and prioritize them and assign them to people, right? So my recommendation is just create a risk register or some Excel sheet where you're like, okay, we've got unsecured credentials. We've got misconfigured logon script. We've got non-unique local admin accounts or passwords, and you kind of go through and you document them, brief description, what it is, how to remediate it, assign it to somebody, have a status on it, right? And then you meet once a week or every other week or whatever your cadence, works for you guys. You meet and talk about those things. Specifically, are there any hangups? Are there things that are getting in the way? you know, if maybe it's, you know, some forest functional level upgrade that we need, that's going to be a bigger lift. So we have to document that and plan that, but document it, meet on a regular basis, tackle these things. That's kind of the core of this. And again, remember, credentials, access control. We want to focus on things that mitigate credential opportunities, mitigate, you know, lateral movement and access in the environment, and mitigate attacker control in the environment. Write down all your vulnerabilities. Yeah, Tim. Yeah, if you're gonna document it, obviously don't put it in a file share that's world readable. I think that would be great. So next is AD Security 101. So we've got some of those misconfigurations identified, right? We've identified some of the low-hanging fruit. We're starting to tackle it. We're documenting it, right? And more importantly, we're taking action on those things. So we don't wait till we have everything documented and have all our ducks in a row. We just start working on some of this, making progress on some of this. Nice, good summary. So AD Security 101. So this is where we're going to kind of go a little bit more in depth. We're going to do a little bit more pruning and certainly more documentation, right? So step number one, identify misconfigurations, start tackling those things right away. Step number two is we're going to start cleaning stuff up, right? We're going to remove unnecessary files, folders, scripts. We're going to clean up our shares. We're going to tidy things up, right? The more organized we can be, the more clean we can make our shares in our environment, the easier it's going to be when we want to kind of like prune things and configure things and reorganize the structure, right? Because there's going to be all this stuff that we can kind of get rid of. We might have to update our schema. We might have to configure labs permissions, deploy group policies, but we're going to kind of start that cleanup process. We're also going to deploy labs, right? If we're not using labs or something similar, we're going to deploy labs everywhere. Servers, workstations, you name it. Deploy labs, configure it, set the permissions, set the GPOs, and away you go. It's really a three-step process. It's not super scary once you've gone through it, but labs everywhere is kind of a key thing here. Because again, remember, credentials, we don't want them getting credentials, threat actors. We don't want them getting access, right? So configuring our permissions correctly here is really key. We're going to remove password files. We're going to store them in a secure place, right? We're going to go out and look for them. We're going to store them in a secure place, and then we're going to educate users, whether it's IT, developers, DBAs, end users, what have you. We're going to make sure that those passwords are strong. So if we do find, you know, the password for a service account, and we notice like, hey, maybe that's not the most strongest password, we're going to rotate it. We're going to change that password. We're going to document it in our vault or wherever it is, and we're going to rotate it, right? And a little pro tip here, something that I would recommend is turn these credentials, turn these accounts into canaries. So if you find an account on a file share, right, in a text file or something, and you're not using it anymore, or if you just, you know, have admin accounts laying around that you're not using, turn those into canaries. Put the password somewhere like in the description or the notes, or kind of, you know, there's a lot of different creative things you can do there, but turn those into canaries because those are already out there kind of placed in a typical spot that threat actors would look for them. So turn those into canaries is a great tip. And then we're going to disable RC4, we're going to enforce AES, and we're going to prune SPNs. So you're going to look at all of your admin groups, all your tier 0 groups, account operators, server admins, backup operators. You're going to look at all those groups. And for all those users, you're going to make sure that none of them have SPNs unless there's a really good reason for it, right? So prune SPNs, you know, remove the ability to curb roast those. Ensure those passwords are strong. If you don't know what the password is, you're going to change it and then make sure it's a strong password, right? And that's what we're going to do at this phase, at this step. Yes, this will be recorded, Mark, for sure. We'll send out a link through email or however you registered with slides and in the recording. So credentials, access, What we're going to do is we're going to document. So we're going to document our admin and service accounts. We're going to document their group membership, delegations, the tasks that they have running, services that are running under these accounts. Documentation is the most important thing. It fixes almost every issue. It doesn't need to be fancy. And you don't need to overthink it. Just start documenting and make sure that everybody knows where that documentation is, and then make sure everybody is following those same processes, right? Even if it's just making a small change, right? Nathan, who's a good friend of mine, has mentioned this to me before. It's like, just have a place where you document, like, hey, we're making this change here. This is what it does. Like a brief, high level thing, like, hey, we're making this change. So when something breaks or something doesn't work, or we have a misconfiguration, we can go back and we can figure out what we did, why we did it, who did it, etc. So documentation is really, really important. For admin and service accounts, we're going to document their kind of like their current access, and we're going to kind of work on our desired access at the next step. But for admin and service accounts, we're going to document what those permissions are and what those look like. For file shares, we're going to document their current access, their desired access, and this goes for SharePoint or wikis or things like that. Start documenting what users or groups or departments need access to what, so you can kind of fine tune that later on. And for lack of a better way, Excel makes it for a really good way to kind of document this, right? So feel free to use your own methods, however you want to document, wherever, but start documenting in some way, right? Document the account, what it's used for, what groups it needs to be in, the delegations especially. Same thing with service accounts, right? If that service account is used to run a scheduled task on a server, document it. If it's running a service somewhere, document it. Document the permissions that it needs. I think a lot of IT and systems administration is just documentation, right? If you have good documentation, you can refer back to that at a later date, because no one can remember what accounts need what permissions or where and why. No one can remember all that way. No one can remember all of that. So it creates so much more headspace to think about other things if you can just document it so you don't have to remember it. So this is for file shares. So file shares, not interactive. Yeah, and that's a good point. At some place documentation, people said there's a thing called what's the word for it? Tribal knowledge, as I hear is a phrase a lot of times, right? There's people who are 15 years tenured at an organization, right? And they're the only people that know how that thing works. That is a vulnerability, right? If you document it and you force a team to go about documenting it, not only can you address issues easier, right? Because you know where to go to look for that information, but somebody mentioned incidents, right? If you have an incident, there's information there of what that service is, why, where, what the permissions are, et cetera. So documentation is annoying, it's hard, it's difficult, and it's grueling, and nobody likes doing it, but it is foundational, and that is really, really important. So file shares, just documenting if it's a share, if it's a wiki, what the resource is, who needs access, and what kind of level of access. So I have an example here. Feel free to steal it, but file share 1, IT, they need modify, right? It's their share. Whereas accounting, maybe there's some accounting documents, or maybe it's a marketing department, right? Just allow marketing to use that share and modify things in that share, right? There's no reason why we need to have other groups being able to modify or have full control on those shares. So remember, credentials, access, control. So the control part of this is essentially out with the old, disabled, and not used, and in with the new, right? So you're going to clean up security groups. You're going to clean up users in those groups. If you have disabled accounts that are just kind of sitting out there, or group policies that you don't use anymore that are just kind of left out there because you just haven't quite cleaned them up yet. Logon scripts. I don't know how many times I've done a pen test and I go to the sysfall share and there's just like hundreds of logon scripts that aren't even used anymore, right? Do a little cleanup, clean out those things, out with the old, in with the new, right? And of course, document. As you're going through, this is a good opportunity to document things. And then reduce your administrative burden by disabling Spooler on DCs and restricting older protocols like Almanar and NBNS, SMB1 on DCs, certificates. These are things that we're going to do at this stage using the tools that I mentioned previously. So we're going to actually tackle those things here. Oh, wow. So the next phase is 201. So remember, credentials, access control. We've got the misconfigurations. We're kind of finding the low-hanging fruit. We're getting rid of, easy ways to get credentials. We're restricting lateral movement, right? With laps, with cleaning up shares, with cleaning up security groups and GPOs and logon scripts and authentication protocols, like the ones that are easier, low-hanging fruit. So restricting access and control. And now we're going to do the same thing. We're going to look at credentials, access, and control. We're just going to kind of take it up a notch. And that is password. We're going to start with password policies. Password policies and fine-grained passwords, right? 12 to 14, I think, is a good starting point. Any less than that, I think, is just a little bit too weak. That being said, this is not the end-all be-all, right? There's a reason we have layered controls, right? You can still have an 8-character password policy, but still have a very defensible environment. But something that is not used often enough is fine-grained password policies. Fine-grained password policies are great because you can configure a specific password policy for specific OUs. So maybe it's your tier 0 accounts or your service accounts or help desk accounts or other admin accounts. You can configure a password policy so that even if the IT admin tries, they can't set a weak password on that account. Now, I know what you're going to say. For those that are clever, you can kind of go into Active Directory and kind of cheat it, right? For those that know. But in normal situations, you can't. If you have a fine-grained password policy set that says, hey, you need to use 25 characters, it's not going to let you use 8. So fine-grained password policies are really, really good. Stats for breaking 13 characters or less. I have cracked 20 plus character passphrases. So it's definitely something to consider. And my advice there generally is to instruct users to not use like dictionary words or words together in common language. So everybody's probably heard correct horse battery staple. That's a great password and concept, but in implementation, that is actually a very bad password. Now, also kind of using Bible verses and songs and things like that, words that you would kind of commonly hear together is what I would recommend against. But we've definitely cracked 20 character passphrases. We've cracked 14 character passwords. We've cracked all different sorts of things. And the main thing is entropy. When it comes to passwords, entropy is everything. And you can have 9, 10 character passwords that probably won't be cracked anytime soon, just based on entropy. Using password managers like Bitwarden, yes, definitely. Bitwarden, heck, people are going to bring up LastPass, but Delinea, Thycotic, whatever it is that you feel comfortable with, definitely use those solutions. Find the features that work best for you and use those. Yeah, backups for sure. So password policies, this is another great opportunity to use canaries, right? Find accounts that you're not using anymore. Use your file shares, but implement some deceptive technologies. This is something that is very, very underutilized, but it's very high fidelity. When those alerts go off, you know that somebody is touching a file or doing something that they shouldn't. If you go to Think's website, Canary tokens, you can find some really great free Canary tokens that you can use. So you can set up canaries when somebody clones the website. You can create canaries when somebody launches a program or runs a specific command, all sorts of fun things on top of like file shares and credentials and things. So really good, but we're going to take a look at some deception at this stage in the game and kind of implement some of those things. So access. 201 access. This is tiered security and protected users. Two of the most important features in Active Directory. One of those things is built in. The other is kind of more difficult to do because it's not just out of the box. So not just out of the box is tiered security. This starts with the Red Forest model or the enterprise access model that Microsoft has created. Somebody linked it earlier. Snaffler, cool. And Monash. So Jake Hildreth mentioned Monash to me. And I started looking at it. I'm like, wow, this is really cool. I like thinking about it as in terms of micro-segmentation, which I'll talk about in a second. But so tiered security was kind of built on these models. The Monash enterprise access model is the one recently from Monash University in Australia. Really good reading. Highly recommend checking it out. We're going to talk about tiered security and protected users just for a minute. So protected users is built in. You do need to be on domain functional level of server 2012 R2 or later. But the benefit is really great. Restricts lateral movement, restrict privilege escalation, more granular control of admin accounts, right? More granular auditing and things like that. So in the Monash enterprise access model, they talk about this idea of micro-segmentation. Microsoft calls it different things. It's called tiered security, least privilege, zero trust. You know, there's a lot of buzzwords for this, right? But the idea is, I like the term micro-segmentation. It just kind of lands better in my head. But essentially, you restrict what admins can control and where they can log in. And not just admins, right? But service accounts, users, things like that. You control where you control or administer what accounts can control. Remember, credentials, access, control, and where they can log in, right? Access. So credentials, access, control. So I'm starting to kind of hopefully tie this together in some sort of framework that maybe makes sense using tiered security and micro-segmentation and protected users and things. So the idea here is you don't allow, nor do you log in to a workstation, right, with a domain admin account, right? As we'll see with protected users, that domain admin account will have its credentials cached when you log in. So that's a no-no in micro-segmentation tiered security world. You also don't allow help desk to reset accounts that are higher tier than them, right? So help desk can only reset standard user accounts or accounts at the same level or below, not other admin accounts, right? Not domain admins, not enterprise admins, nothing at a higher tier, right? Nor can they manage resources in a higher tier, right? You don't want help desk to be able to manage your SCCM server or your domain controllers or things like that. So domain admin user generally has 4 or more accounts too as a normal working day. Yeah. The downside of this is you have multiple accounts, right? You have many accounts and you have to log into them and use them for different purposes, right? I get it. It's frustrating and it's annoying and it's not an easy proposition to say, hey, now you need all of these, 7 or 8 different accounts to manage all these things. And yeah, like Jake says, accounts are free, breaches aren't. That's a really, really good point. Really good point. So micro-segmentation, real quick discourse on this, right? I got a lot of this information from a good friend, Nathan, who's also like a real whiz at Active Directory and tiered security and has done this before many different times. But like I said, step number 1, remember to document. Step number 2, start building out the structure, right? We organize into OUs, servers go into application groups or whatever makes sense for you. Desktops, you can organize by site or department. Again, whatever makes sense for you, but build out a structure, right? Start thinking about how we can segment these accounts, segment the access, segment the control, and segment kind of the security. So this is just some examples, right, of accounts, groups, and computers and what that might look like, right? You have tier 0, tier 1, tier 2, right? Domain admins, server admins, workstation admins, etc. So the important thing to know is this is not a prescriptive thing. This is kind of a model that you can adapt and use in your environment. So you have to figure out what works for you. You have to figure out what your OU structure looks like for you and for your organization. But this is kind of the model to build on. Regular user account, workstation admin, server admin. Yeah, that's great, Mark. Yeah, and there's that. So that Monash security model, they talk about zones within tiers. So it's very, very crazy and get very in depth, right? But at the bare minimum, just starting out with tier 0, tier 1, tier 2 is a great starting point, right? And just start there and start building out some of this structure. This is again just another screenshot or another example of what some of this would look like, and kind of an example, right? With this user account, you have your tier 0, your tier 1, your tier 2, and your standard account. For group policies, right? You have your tier 1 OU, server OU, with a tier 1 group policy, right? You have your workstations OU or many different ones, and you have your tier 2, desktop admin accounts. And then essentially you get to a point where you can delete, domain admins from local admins on workstations. You can delete all those other members and just add the users or groups that should have admin on those workstations. hardened.ad.net. I don't know if I know that. Yeah, this will be recorded, and then we'll be sending the slides out. So that's the next step, right? Is kind of building out this structure. And remember to document. So as we kind of segue to protected users from tiered security, the most important thing to take away is, having separate accounts for separate things, and thinking about, I don't want low privileged users to have control or access to higher privileged things, and I don't want high privileged users to be logging in or controlling low privileged systems. And then take this and adapt it to your environment, to your team, to your culture, and that kind of thing. So protected users. Another great presentation by Jake is, he's got a presentation he did recently besides Charm, and he's done other places. There's a link here for the slides if you want to go check them out. I highly recommend it. But protected users. So in order to talk about protected users, I think it makes sense to think about credentials, access, and control, right? That's why I made this presentation the way I did. Was admins like threat actors like admin credentials, right? They thrive on them. Their campaigns, their operations depend on them being able to get credentials, right? And of course, if you're going to get credentials, why not admin credentials? So you get admin credentials from, when a domain admin logs in to a workstation, right, to help administer something, or when your a domain admin is configured a scheduled task to run under their account, or when they have a service that's running, they installed software and now there's a service running as that domain admin account. Kerberoasting, relaying attacks, these are all things that allow threat actors to get credentials, get access, and enact control on an environment. Protected users is a direct mitigation to this. So with protected users, you can't authenticate with NTLM, you can't use DES or RC4, accounts can't be delegated, and the Kerberos ticket lifetime is severely limited. So that let's say an admin logs into a workstation and there's a Kerberos ticket there, I can't just grab that if it's after 4 hours and use it, right? Stop doing risky things with your AD admin accounts. Yeah, that's a good advice. I appreciate that. And like I said, wherever they're logged in, their credentials aren't cached, which is a big bonus to protected users. Like I said, Jake Hildreth has a really great presentation on this. It goes into much more in depth on not only what protected users is, why you need it, why you should use it, but also how to implement it. What I like about his presentation is it walks you through how to prepare, how to audit, how to enact. Like it shows here is check for the prerequisites, implement some auditing, right? Figure out where you might have some insecure authentication used. Mark the user as sensitive, as kind of like a cheat code to kind of dip your toes into it. And then, you can put that user in protected users group and test it. Also a plug, Jake has a tool he's releasing sometime this fall-ish, maybe, called PowerPug, I believe. It's essentially a tool to help people implement protected users group. So I definitely recommend checking that out and following Jake on GitHub and stuff for when he does that. But protected users is a very, very, very powerful control. It's built into Windows, and I definitely recommend checking out and trying to get some admin accounts there and getting to use that. The last section here with control is controlling authentication, right? Specifically NTLM v1 and SMB and LDAP, right? The reason why NTLM v1 is super, super important is it is a very, very serious issue in many environments. That's because of something called an authentication downgrade attack. Essentially what you can do is the default setting, like it shows here in the screenshot, the default setting on domains is set to 3, which means you can send, which means clients send NTLM v2 responses only. And but the DCs, the domain controllers, accept LM and NTLM v2, which means you can do something called an authentication downgrade, which essentially means you can obtain an authentication request. You can crack that NT hash for a computer account, for example, or you could use rainbow tables. And once you have that, you can, DC sync, you can do silver ticket attacks, you can kind of have your way. But essentially you capture an authentication, you crack it, or you use what's called rainbow tables to recover the NT hash. And then, bad things can kind of happen from there, especially if you capture authentication from a domain controller, right? And like it shows in the screenshot, this is not something I do on an internal pen test typically because of the time frame is restricted. But you can use like 8 1080 rigs, which are graphics cards. In 6 days, you can kind of crack it. So I'm running short on time here, so I'm going to wrap up. So kind of going back to the beginning here, right? It's kind of a cyclical process. We identify misconfigurations, we implement AD Security 101, AD Security 201, and we start this process. Right, we meet on a regular basis. We tackle those things and we repeat. Lastly, how do you get support? I think this is going to be a staple of most of my presentations, but include others, ask for advice and honesty. Right. So, quick example: I was a young buck, IT guy, security guy, doing things, and I run a Nessus scan. I see that there's a system vulnerable to some old XML or something like that. And I just go to the app server and I uninstall it, right? It's an old version. I can't possibly be used, right? There's no way. It's like way out of date. There's nobody using this. Well, a few moments later, some people knock on my cubicle. They're like, "Hey, were you on the app server? Did you do anything on the app server?" I'm like, "Oh yeah, I just uninstalled the old XML." And they're like, "Okay, because production system is down. We can't do business. Like we're not getting paid. We're not getting money in. Like the business is down." And I'm like, shoot, that's bad. So fortunately, it was just something that I could reinstall, right? So we reinstalled it and all was good. But I say that to make an example to say, include others and ask for feedback and advice and be honest, right? If you make a mistake, own it. And on the same token, if you don't know what's going to happen or if you don't know something, be honest or transparent about it and ask for help or ask for advice. One of the best ways to kind of bridge the divide between kind of like a senior tenured person who's been there for a while, who has, seniority or has, their systems that they want to maintain is ask for their advice. If you want to implement something or if you need to configure something or if something is vulnerable, you need to patch something or update something, go to them and ask their advice. Like, how would you approach this? Or like, how can we tackle this? Include them in the decision-making process, include them in that process, more or less. And if you include them instead of just alienate them and kind of going about it yourself, you're much more likely to gain trust and to gain people on your side that are going to help you move forward with whatever it is you're trying to do. And remember that Active Directory is a journey, not a destination, right? I think that was a Ralph Waldo Emerson quote. It's a journey, right? It's not an end state. It's a constant tuning, a constant pruning, a constant process. So take it slow, one step at a time, document, get people on your team, work together, and hopefully you come out the other end with a more secure Active Directory environment. So with that, I'm done. I'm going to go through chat now and look for questions. If you need to jump, I know it's top of the hour, feel free, but I appreciate everyone coming. I appreciate everyone listening and the feedback in the chat. It was super awesome to see everybody chatting and kind of chiming in and talking to each other. So I really appreciate it. And I'm super thankful that you're all here. And I hope you got one little nugget of information or value from this presentation. So I appreciate everyone. Thank you.